the Injury Report here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. It's brought to you by Cape Regional Health System and Dr. Kevin McHale, Cape Regional Health System, and Penn Orthopedics, the best of both worlds for a healthier life. For an appointment, call 609-463-CAPE or visit caperegional.com/orthopedics. Kevin McHale, Dr. Kevin McHale, is with us here each week for a look at some of the key injuries around all of sports, and we have some really interesting ones this week, including possibly, Doc, a season ender in Aaron Rodgers with a broken collarbone. Now, he had this injury a couple of years ago to his non-throwing shoulder. He was able to return, but this time it's his throwing shoulder, and a lot of reports suggesting that he will be done for the year. So, tell us a little bit about the broken collarbone and why maybe he was able to come back a couple of years ago and not this time around.
Yeah, I think the key is that it's his throwing shoulder this time, so very different than that last time. So first of all, this injury is obviously devastating for the Packers and my fantasy team. I had to trade for Roethlisberger, so that showed you where I stand. But so the thing is, last time it was a non-operative, a non-dominant arm clavicle fracture. He was able to return about 8 weeks. He missed 7 games. But the big difference this time is it is his throwing shoulder, and also he needs surgery. Now, there's a few reasons why you need a surgery for this. The bones, the fracture's displaced, where the bone edges aren't really touching anymore, or they're overlapped, or they're broken into smaller pieces, which means they're comminuted. Usually when the surgery is done, it restores the alignment, and it's fixed and it's stable to get back to strengthen the arm and train it back to get on the field. Typically, the return to play after a fixation of a clavicle fracture in the NFL is still only 8 weeks, even after the surgery. But the key is it's his throwing arm. So we see what Andrew Luck's going with, rehabbing from his throwing shoulder. It's very, very difficult for these guys to get their strength back, their velocity back, their accuracy back. So I would not expect an 8-week timeline on him. And unless the Packers have a playoff spot secured, I'm not sure if we're going to be seeing him this season.
Okay, tough injury for Rodgers, Doc, your fantasy team, and a lot of people's out there, and the Packers, because it doesn't look like he'll be able to come back. That's a tough injury to deal with. And a lot of times, I guess you can attest to this, we've seen it happen with a lot of quarterbacks. Once you break that collarbone once, sometimes you're susceptible to it happening again.
Yeah, Romo went through that not too many years ago, and the problem is anytime you break something, it's although we fix it and he has time to heal, it's always a little bit at risk for a re-injury. Now, the good thing is he's going to be getting this fixed surgically, so it gives it a little bit more stability. But the biggest thing is it's going to take a little while for him to get back out there. I mean, these guys are under a lot of pressure when these get tackled by these linebackers. There's a lot of force going across them. So he's got to be at full strength before he's back out there.
Okay, let's go to an Eagles injury here. Not an Eagles injury, but it could affect the Eagles game. Redskins first-round tackle Jonathan Allen has been diagnosed with a Liz Frank sprain in his foot. Now, the reports earlier were just a sprain there, and that he might be back in a couple of weeks. But today, he was placed on the injury reserve list, ending his season. Now, you have the Liz Frank sprain, Liz Frank breaks. We've heard a lot of the Liz Frank in this area because that was a injury that Donovan McNabb had a couple of years back, but we had never really heard this term until recent years. So tell the people what this Liz Frank sprain's all about.
Sure, yeah, McNabb's not the only one, too. I think we had Dawkins, Deuce Staley, Brian Westbrook, all of those guys had Liz Frank injuries during their career. So what we're talking about is an injury to the middle of the foot, okay? It's where the midfoot bones meet up with the metatarsals, so those long bones in your foot that form the arch. And there's quite a spectrum of injuries to this. So a lot of times we hear about midfoot sprains, and these are fairly benign. It's an injury to the same place, but if there's not a lot of displacement of the joint, they can be easily treated with a short period of immobilization in a boot. Once the pain gets better, they start rehabbing, and depending on the severity, you might see a player miss a week or two, up to maybe 6 weeks if it's a little bit more severe. The problem is when there's displacement of this joint, the bones aren't aligned anymore, or there's fractures there, then it needs a surgery where you need to get that joint perfectly aligned and screws to fix it and stabilize it in place. And then once it's fixed, it requires a while for it to heal and for them to rehab and get back. And typically, they're almost universally a season-ending injury unless it happens in the off-season. We actually did a couple of studies, one with my colleagues at Penn and one when I was up at Harvard with the Patriots team doctors on looking at performance after these injuries. And overall, we see a little bit of a decline in performance when players do get back to playing. But it's not that significant. About like 50% of them should get back up to the same level of pre-injury play, or if not better. And we see, actually, Le'Veon Bell is like a recent example of a guy that had it a few years ago. He didn't really need surgery, but we see what he's doing now in the NFL. So, you can get back up to a good level of play, but, it's unfortunate that needs surgery and is done for the year.
These are notoriously difficult recoveries for these Liz Frank injuries, and we know, as you mentioned, the list of them too well, but that'll hurt the Redskins on Monday night against the Eagles. Jonathan Allen now out on the injury reserve. There's a lot of people thought it was only a couple of weeks there, but he will be done. And I guess the name where does that name come from? Is it somebody who suffered that injury?
No, it's this guy. There's like a surgeon in Napoleon's army. He described this joint because equestrians used to enter this joint when they fall off a horse.
Huh.
The foot will get stuck in a stirrup and leads to an injury there, and it's just kind of some historical significance there. It's not necessarily a guy that happens to have the injury, just some doctor trying to get famous off of it.
Gotcha. All right, let's go to what was maybe, I don't know if you saw the video of this one, Doc, but a gruesome leg injury for Gordon Hayward. He dislocated his left ankle and fractured his tibia. The gruesome leg injury was reportedly, though, a clean break, and he has, a long road ahead. His foot was facing in the wrong direction, and it was interesting because he didn't seem to be in all that much pain, which would kind of reveal that he was in probably pretty big shock.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. So, we've seen a few of these lower leg severe injuries in the NBA. We think about Paul George's injury back in the U.S. team a couple years back. We had the open tibia fibula fracture, and this is up there. But so this is a lot more similar to what Odell Beckham recently went through when we were talking about it last week, and that he has an ankle fracture dislocation. Again, that ankle, the foot dislocates out from underneath the ankle and breaks the ankle in the process. The big difference is we talked about that syndesmosis injury with Odell Beckham, and that he tore those ligaments that connect the tibia and fibula. In Hayward's case, it sounds like he actually broke his tibia in the process, meaning that force, instead of going up those ligaments, it went through the bone. Typically, these fractures are still treated with plates and screws, kind of similar to Odell Beckham's. The only difference is, depending on how high that fracture goes up in the tibia, you may need a longer plate or sometimes even a rod that goes down inside the whole length of the tibia to stabilize it. So depends on, what the fracture pattern shows is what he's going to need, but it is quite a long recovery to get back, and unfortunately it may be a season ender for him. I think Paul George missed like 8 months after his injuries, but once he got back, though, you see he's playing at a high level, so hopefully once everything heals, he should be all set to go.
Now, let's you mentioned Odell Beckham. That injury, now this one was a lot more gruesome in terms of the way the foot was kind of placed, but that is what you guys would have been concerned about when you saw Darby's injury that he avoided.
Yeah, exactly. So when you see an ankle dislocation like that, where you see the foot sticking out to the side, it almost always is associated with a fracture. Almost always. And it's very rare for it not to be. So the fact that Darby didn't have that was great, because we see 2 potentially season-ending injuries in Odell Beckham and Hayward's case, and now we have Ronald Darby already back at practice. So obviously the Eagles were really fortunate in that he dodged that injury.
By the way, the Celtics tweeted out a little while ago that Gordon last night underwent successful bony and ligamatosis stabilization surgery on his left ankle. You would probably be able to help me with that more so than I know what they're talking about.
the ligamatosis surgery. So what they're talking about is he may have actually had a little bit of a ligament injury as well. And honestly, when you dislocate the foot, you typically do have some ligament injury, whether it was the syndesmosis or the other ligaments that they had to fix. Either way, it sounds like it was all repaired at the time of surgery, and now it's time to allow it to heal so we can start the rehab.
All right, we're talking with Dr. Kevin McHale here, and we do the injury report each and every week from Cape Regional Health System and Penn Orthopedics, the best of both worlds for a healthier life. For an appointment, call 609-463-CAPE or visit caperegional.com. Orthopedics. Real quick, I wanted to get your take on this because we talked about Embiid and all his problems. They were talking about having a minutes restriction. They didn't implement them seemingly last night, but he was pretty ticked off. In fact, he used a couple expletives when they told him he seemingly feels like, I'm ready to go. But your thoughts on the meniscus injury that he had and the fact that they wanted to kind of, do you think that he should be playing full bore without any restrictions right away?
So I think there's a couple of medical reasons why you'd limit somebody at the beginning of getting back to full play. And the main reason is that off-season practice, off-season training, it doesn't mimic a real game-time scenario. These guys are running at a much higher speed, and they're just trying to kind of gradually reintroduce him back to this kind of high level of play. In general, we know that re-injuries can happen more often when players are fatigued, so they're probably not. They don't want to just max out his endurance right away and put him at risk for a re-injury. And the other thing with Embiid is we know that he's at risk for overuse injuries, right? We saw 2 seasons already go down the drain when he had that navicular stress fracture and a re-injury there. So they're trying to gradually ramp him up to make sure he's at full strength when they increase his number of times. Now, Embiid actually even said, though, he said, I feel like I'm getting cold, I'm sitting on the bench, and I feel tight when I get back out there. And he actually has some, there's some reason behind that. I mean, there's actually that could put him at potentially at a higher risk of injury. So it's like a delicate balance. You want to get him back out on the court and see them. And honestly, from a fan standpoint, we just want to see these guys turn the corner and start making a playoff run. So hopefully we see them a lot more minutes on there.
Well, it's interesting because I remember last year, he'd get to 25 and they take him out of the game. They go to overtime. He want to come back in, and the doctors are sitting there behind the bench, and Embiid's behind or kicking the chairs, and the doctors are saying, hey, you were doing this for your own good. So you guys, in your role, you have a lot of balance of trying to talk to these players who are so competitive they want to get out there, and they feel like their bodies can do it. I'm sure that Joel feels like there's no reason why I can't play back-to-backs and why I can't play more minutes.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. One of the doctors I worked with that took care of a lot of these pro athletes said, I can give them my opinion, but they have a million reasons to do otherwise. And, there's a lot of incentive for these guys out there, their pride, just their drive to compete. And sometimes you do have to kind of protect them and hold them back so they don't re-injure themselves. I think in this case, I think hopefully as long as his recovery continues as it has been, we should be seeing a lot more of him and a lot more minutes out there as his endurance picks up and as he's getting a little stronger.
Okay, he is Dr. Kevin McHale for the weekly look at the injuries, Cape Regional Health System, and Penn Orthopedics, the best of both worlds, 609-463-CAPE, or visit caperegional.com. And by the way, Ronald Darby at practice, 6-week time, he might play. So that 4 to 6 weeks looked like it was right on track to see if he plays on Monday night from that injury he had back there in week number 1. Doc, we always learn something, and it's amazing how many people tell me, man, the things that he talks about and the way he explains them, I'm learning something. So we're all learning something in this segment. We appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on. I had fun doing it. So I'm looking forward to talking to you guys next week, hopefully about no more Eagles.
All right. Well, we got a lot of great injuries to learn about, and we thank Dr. Kevin McHale.